Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people do that today, so. All right. Okay, where are we at next? Okay, so as we dorsiflex, the fibula rotates 3 to 5 degrees externally, and then rotates 3 to 5 degrees internally during plantar flexion. So there's not only the sagittal plane movement, but there's also that rotary movement that allows us to reach those maximal joint angles, dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. So the distal tibiofibular joint actually opens up just a few millimeters to allow us to get into that extreme amount of dorsiflexion. So very important, one of the most often overlooked parts of being able to squat really well is just simply your ankle mobility.
It's kind of crazy how much 1 or 2 millimeters can actually change it.
Yeah, well, for sure. Like when we did our functional movement screen, just opening up the ankle just a little bit more could make a huge difference with your overhead squat technique. So definitely worth things that you can do on a daily basis to improve movement. Okay, so inversion and eversion. So these movements take place at joints that are below the true ankle joint. So the subtalar joint. Subtalar means below the talus, right? So the talocalcaneal joint, and then the transverse tarsal joints. So transverse means across the foot. So we're looking at across the foot, the joint between the talus and navicular. So the talonavicular, and between the calcaneus and the cuboid. So the calcaneo-cuboid. So these 3 joints are the joints that enable us to turn our foot in and out. So the true ankle joint is just a uniplanar joint. So these joints are classified as gliding or arthrodial. So just small gliding type movements that allow us to invert and evert. So we get a lot more range of motion with inversion, and so about 90% of ankle sprains are inversion type sprains. So you're going to disrupt ligaments on the lateral side of the foot. Because think about it, you turn your foot in and the ligaments that are under tension are on the lateral side. So this is kind of a nice diagram that I went out external to your textbook and brought into this PowerPoint because it does show all the joints, exactly where the subtalar, the talocalcaneal, calcaneocuboid, you look right here. So the transverse tarsal joints, so that's the talonavicular. It's right here between the navicular and the talus. The calcaneocuboid, you're right here between the calcaneus and the cuboid here. So it kind of just divides everything up to where you can see the articulations between all the bones of the foot. So when we talk about the subtalar joint, we're talking about the joint on the lateral side, right here, talocalcaneal, okay, so between the talus and the calcaneus, right between those bones would be the subtalar joint. Okay, so other joints in the foot. The great toe metatarsophalangeal. So the knuckle joint of the great toe basically is a ginglymus type hinge joint. So we're talking about this joint right here. So you can see the degrees of movement there. So as you're there, your feet are flat on the ground. See how far you can extend. See if you can extend the great toe at the first metatarsophalangeal joint. See if you can extend that up to 70 degrees. And then see if you can flex it 45 degrees. So see how those degrees compare with your own range of motion. Okay, So the metatarsophalangeal joints of the four lesser toes. So we're talking about here, just at the base. So kind of like the knuckle joints of the four lesser toes are condyloid. So mostly flexion and extension, but there is some ability to abduct and adduct. So as you're sitting there and listening to this, see if you can spread your toes apart and pull them back together as you're listening. Compare with yourself. Okay, so the interphalangeal joints, the great toe has just one. Okay, so it can flex up to 90 degrees. So try, as you're sitting there in your shoes, try that on yourself. Can you flex that great toe interphalangeal joint 90 degrees? The proximal interphalangeal joints of the four lesser toes. So remember, all the four lesser toes have two, a proximal and a distal. So the proximal one can flex up to 35 degrees. So we're talking about this one right here. And then if we go down further, the distal one, we can flex even a little bit more with that one. What's interesting is there's even a little bit of hyperextension to 30 degrees there, which I think would be important when pushing off from the ground, like when running or sprinting. That last little push from the ground would be that connection between the ground and the distal phalanx of those four lesser toes. So there might be a need for a little bit of extension, even hyperextension there. So we're talking about this joint right here, the distal interphalangeal of the four lesser toes. Okay, so ankle sprains, 90% of the time, inversion type sprains. So there's two common ligaments that you'll need to know. So test question, guaranteed. I'll ask you to list these two ligaments. So they are right here. So the anterior talofibular, and calcaneofibular. So again, ligaments named according to the bones that connect. So the talus and the fibula, the calcaneus and the fibula, both on the lateral side, those ligaments are going to be under tension if the ankle is excessively inverted. So again, commit those to your memory.
It's just those two.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so this is always a good chapter to show still frames of gruesome injuries. Okay, so does Carl do that in his class? No, not much? Okay, well, this is a little more entertaining. Unfortunate for Alex Smith, though, and I'm a fan of his because he went to the University of Utah. They won a bowl game the year he was quarterback there. So the transverse tarsal and subtalar joints allow for more inversion and eversion due to three different factors. So three factors. So why is it that we have more inversion versus eversion? These three factors. First one is the fibula extends further distally. So if you visualize the ankle joint, the medial malleolus is a lot shorter versus the lateral malleolus. So because the lateral malleolus is a lot longer, it provides a bony block. So we don't get as much eversion as we do inversion. So the medial malleolus is a lot shorter, and so we can turn the foot in a lot more versus turning the foot out. So the second one, the lateral aspect of the ankle, doesn't have as much ligamented support. So the two ligaments that we talked about, anterior talofibular, calcaneofibular, those are the two primary ones. So there's a lot less ligamented support to stabilize the ankle in neutral and keep it from turning in. Very last one, the lateral everter musculature. So if you want to keep the foot from turning in, what muscles do you need to be able to activate quickly? You got to activate the muscles that do the opposite function, right? So if you feel right here, your peroneals, if you want to keep the foot from turning in, you've got to activate muscles that are opposite, that turn the foot in the opposite direction to keep it neutral. Problem is these muscles are at a mechanical disadvantage. So they're less able to resist forces that tend to turn the foot in quickly. And so the ligaments then are responsible for stabilizing the foot, and oftentimes they can't support the force. So those 3 reasons. This is another good test question, by the way. So list the 3 reasons that most inversion sprains are, or most sprains are inversion. Okay, so less common is an eversion type sprain where you turn the foot out, which would involve the deltoid ligament. So the deltoid ligament is comprised of these 4 ligaments on the medial side. And so you can see big, thick ligaments, not as, there's a lot more soft tissue support versus on the lateral side.
Do we even know the 4 or just
I'll have a study guide for you. Okay, so very last part of today, we need to talk about the arches of the foot. So the foot has 3 arches. 2 of them are longitudinal. One of them is across the foot, so it's a transverse arch. So the 2 longitudinal arches come from the connection between bones. So the connection between bones and the ligaments that tie the bones together make up the arches. And this can be different. There's a lot of individual variation here. So the medial longitudinal arch involves the medial bones of the foot. So the calcaneus, the talus, the navicular, all 3 cuneiforms, and then the medial metatarsals. So the first one with the great toe, and then the next 2 would all be incorporated into the medial longitudinal arch. The lateral longitudinal arch just incorporates the lateral bones. So the calcaneus, talus, cuboid, and then the distal ends of the 4th and 5th metatarsals here. So the arches of the foot provide an ideal weight-bearing surface. They also provide elasticity for propulsion. So remember, when we take a step, there's a loading phase where the tissues absorb energy and then they release energy as we push off from the ground. So the way that the foot is designed here with this arch, as we step into the ground, we load the foot, we absorb energy into those muscles and tissues, and then as we push off the ground, all of those tissues recoil, and so we're able to propel our body forward. So long arches, medium and lateral, can be high, medium, or low. So a flat feet, the condition is known as pes planus. Flat feet would be a collapse of the medial longitudinal arch. So in a case like this, you probably want to get some shoes where you have some arch support on that medial side to help, because there's with this type of condition, there can be a lot of compression against those structures on the underside of the foot. So blood vessels, nerves, muscles, tendons, ligaments, all of those things can be inflamed as a result of this type of condition if you don't have adequate arch support. So in this case, you'd want to find some shoes where you're able to get some support on the medial side. So the transverse arch of the foot goes across. So if we look at the bases of the metatarsals, so this would be a left foot that we're looking at right here. So this would be the great toe and then the 4 lesser toes. And so this transverse arch goes horizontally across the foot. And so you have these 2 longitudinal arches, then a transverse arch across the top. And so that allows for the optimal bearing of load. You think about a squat where you have all that weight and your feet provide that connection into the ground. And so that distal segment during closed chain activities is where most of the stress is going to be. So very important that we take care of our feet, that we have adequate support for our feet, that we sometimes what's left out in a strength program is strengthening for your feet. How many do specific strengthening exercises for your feet? Okay, that's a good idea, because just like any other part of your body, if other parts of your body are strengthened, doesn't it make sense to do something to strengthen the part that actually connects your body to the ground? Okay. So there are specific exercises you can do, flexion and extension of your toes and so on, to strengthen the muscles of your feet. Which is, you think about it, your feet, that's where you push from the ground. If you can strengthen those muscles, that gives you just that much more of an advantage, in my opinion. So strengthening your feet isn't hard. It's mostly just manual type of resistance. I've even seen just doing toe flexion and extension in sand and other types of materials and so on that can strengthen the flexors and extensors in your feet.
I know you do a lot when I was coming back from a sprained ankle, you do a lot of strength.
Yeah. But my philosophy is, why wait till it's broken? Why not fix it or strengthen it or make it more resilient before there's a problem? Okay, so that's all that I have for you today. Do you have any questions?